Hey everyone, and welcome to Ramblin' Reviews, where we analyze different types of media and or their cultural relevance. My name's Christian, and this is The Amazing Spider-Man, issue number 3. We open with Spidey stopping some criminals from breaking into a safe, and we have our first introduction of what's called the spider signal, where you see here it's just this light of essentially Spider-Man's mask. This spider signal isn't always in like every adaptation, or I would say it's semi-iconic because it's not something he uses all the time, but it is something that does exist in a few adaptations at least. I know it's used in the 90s animated series, it's used in Spectacular Spider-Man. I can't think of any instance outside of the comics other than those two things where it's used in, but in any case, it's a semi-iconic thing, so it definitely bears mentioning. And this is the first appearance of the spider signal. Spidey, of course, makes quick work of the guys, and as he leaves them for the cops to, take to jail and everything, he's thinking to himself about how, crime and everything has just gotten real stale lately. He kind of wishes he had a bigger challenge, and he's going to regret saying that, or rather thinking that, pretty soon here as we continue on. Next, we're introduced to Dr. Otto Octavius, nicknamed Dr. Octopus because he uses this contraption where he has these metallic arms that he controls and is able to use to conduct nuclear experiments at the Atomic Research Center. But as he's performing these experiments, something goes horribly wrong. They try to sound the alarm in time, but as they're about to trip the alarm, they're too late because an explosion occurs, covering the Doctor in a mass of radiation, which ends up, of course, fusing the tentacles he was using to conduct his experiments directly to him. After the good doctor is taken to the hospital, the doctors find that the arms have been fused to his skin, and he also seems to be experiencing some permanent form of brain damage. So as they leave, the doc realizes that there are bars on the window. Now, it is a hospital and it's an intensive care unit, so of course there are going to be bars, but he realizes pretty quickly that he can control his arms and use them to rip off the bars and is able to escape. He thinks to himself, no one's going to be able to hold Dr. Octopus, and starts to think really highly of himself. I mean, he already thought highly of himself as is, but now he's like, he's becoming more and more of a megalomaniac. With all this going on, of course, J. Jonah Jameson at the Bugle, which it's now actually being called the Bugle, wants pictures of the whole thing, so he sends Peter off to go get the pictures. Spidey shows up, of course, as Spidey, Peter gets into a suit and all, shows up to the hospital where everything's happening here, and thinks to himself even, I wonder if who's causing all this havoc. This Dr. Octopus guy is finally going to be a challenge for me. He's about to find out just how right he is in that assumption, as Doc Ock actually is holding these people hostage and forces them to get some kind of equipment. Again, this stuff isn't like explicitly explained, but they get him some kind of, science equipment. He's shown using like beakers and stuff in the panel, and and they're telling him, they're like, all right, we've gotten you the equipment you want and everything. Let us go. And Doc Ock's like, not until I finish what I'm doing. Like, what are you doing? You're insane. And he's like, you doubt my power? Like all this shit. And it's like, I will say at this point, the only issue I have with Doc Ock, especially in the beginning here, or his first appearance, his motivations are very, very unclear. He really does feel like he's just like a evil for the sake of being evil, for the sake of being a bad guy for Spider-Man to fight. A lot of people do think that Doc Ock is Spider-Man's main, like his worst villain, and we'll get into that more as we continue here, but personally, I don't. I think that title belongs to the Green Goblin. I can also see an argument for Venom. I think his big three are Venom, Gabi, and Doc Ock. But I would definitely give it to Green Goblin. But we'll get to all the stuff as we continue here. In any case, Spidey shows up. breaks through a window and interrupts Doc Ock's little interrogation here with his hostages, and begins to take the good doctor on. Spidey gives his usual quips and is able to avoid Doc Ock as he takes some swings at him with his arms. But as Spidey tries webbing up his opponent's arms, if he tries webbing up Doc Ock's arms here, he finds quickly that the Doctor is able to actually break through the webbing, which Spidey hasn't actually seen anybody do before. As the two continue to do battle, Doc Ock has him on the ropes, as he eventually beats and humiliates Spider-Man. Tossing him out the window, Spidey is extremely down on himself after the end of this fight. And, I think it's a really interesting and important moment here to bring up the fact that Spidey, of course, started this issue, and this is obviously intentional. This is just great storytelling, where he started this issue being all like, "Oh, crime. It's gotten too easy for me to take down criminals. I really hope someone gives me a run for my money soon." Now this guy shows up that does, and the first time Spidey is beaten, this is the first time he's really, beaten by someone like this. He's basically ready to kind of throw in the towel. He thinks to himself like, "What? My power wasn't enough. Like, what can I do? Is this the end of Spider-Man?" Meanwhile, Doc Ock makes it back to his old research center and throws everyone out, taking it over, now believing that with control of this power plant, he'll be able to control the world, the city, something. And it gets so bad that the U.S. military is even called in to take on Doc Ock. They send in tanks and everything. It gets pretty crazy as far as all that's concerned. Now at this point, Peter really has thrown in the towel. He calls up JJ to tell him no, or rather JJ calls him, and Peter just tells him, "No, I'm sorry, I don't have the pictures, and I'm never going to get pictures again. There's not going to be any more, any of this." He just is completely giving up on everything. Aunt May asks him, what's wrong, what's going on, and he says, "Oh, it's my own thing. I'll get over it. I got to deal with it, but I got to head to school." Luckily, while he's at school, the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four is there to give a school assembly speech. Now, I'm not sure if any of you ever remember what school assemblies were like, but I know when I was growing up, when I was in middle school, high school, all that, sometimes we'd have a local celebrity, if you will, come in and talk about their experience. Normally it was drugs, and the message was to stay away from drugs. It was like an anti-drug thing wrapped up in this, believe in yourself kind of message, which ultimately was a good message, and so is the message that Human Torch gives to Peter here. He ultimately says how, look, even though things are really tough, things have been really tough for the Fantastic Four before. We've gotten beaten before, but it doesn't matter if you get beaten. It matters if you get back up. He doesn't say that explicitly, but it is definitely getting to that common sentiment of, it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked back down, just as long as you get up one more time. And I very much agree with that sentiment, very much believe in that sentiment, and I think that ultimately this is a good message, not only for Peter, of course, but for the audience, reading this as well, and for us as we, discuss this and everything here. Peter is so inspired by this that he goes up to Johnny, the Human Torch. He goes up to Johnny Storm specifically and thanks him for his inspirational words. Johnny's like, "Hey, no problem, kid. It's what I'm doing," and all this stuff. So he suits back up as Spidey, gets ready to take down Doc Ock. Remember I mentioned how the military is there? Well, they're there, but they really might as well not be, because nothing comes of the fact that they are there. They're kind of cordoning Doc Ock in the lab, but this is exactly where he wants to be, where he thinks he has full control over everything, so they're not really stopping him with doing anything. In any case, they're guarding the place. Spidey makes his way past the military, kind of like he did the guards in the in issue 1. Yes, issue 1. And Doc Ock, of course, sees him from sensors and cameras and stuff in the lab, where he then is able to use all sorts of contraptions in the lab to try and kill Spider-Man while he's there. Spidey's able to avoid them all, of course, and eventually makes his way into a chemical lab of his own, where he's able to wrap test tubes with wire. The test tubes are filled with, and I kid you not when I say, a chemical which fuses metal together. That is literally what it's described as in the next panel, as we see it, or the next page as we see it here in a minute. They didn't bother to explain what the chemical's actually called, so why should I? This is another instance where I really like that we're seeing Peter using his brains and his scientific nature, if you will, inclination to, beat the villains and things like that. Although, unlike what happened with the Vulture, where it really explained what this anti-magnetic device was, or this magnetic inverter device was, and all this stuff, with this, it's just a chemical that fuses metal together. So, good, same idea, don't really like the execution as much. As Spidey catches up with Doc Ock for round 2, the two of them begin battle, where one of the beakers is accidentally broken and fuses the, again, chemical that fuses metal together. It gets it, on Doc Ock's arms, fusing his metal arms together. Who'da thunk? Again, I just hate the writing of that part. It's like you did so well with the magnetic inverter and stuff for the Vulture, but for Doc Ock, he gets a chemical that fuses metal together. What is that chemical? Like, I don't know. I just want something like, I don't know, metallic adhesive or something that just sounds better than, I don't know. It's a nitpick, but it's like the real only issue I have with this comic here. In any case, Doc Ock, now having lost the use of two of his arms, Spidey's able to take him a lot quicker, a lot easier. It's less of a challenge, of course. Ends up webbing the guy's face, so now he can't even see. The two do battle for a while until Spidey finally beats him. It's a pretty standard battle at this point. There's some grabbing with Doc Ock's arms, there's some, regular fighting, things that you'd expect, and eventually he is able to take him down, web up his other two arms, and not the police this time, but the military who's there, because remember they were sent in, is there to collect Doc Ock after Spidey's taken them down. Now, I don't know if this little red Spider-Man thing next to Doc Ock here on his arms in this panel was a mishap, but I like to think that this is one of Spidey's cards. He does often leave cards for the cops, the military, whoever he's leaving things, where it just says, courtesy of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. It's like, special delivery, I got the bad guy for you, Did your job, essentially. After all that's taken care of, Peter goes to visit the Human Torch at a doctor's office. And I didn't really mention this before because it wasn't relevant, but the Human Torch had this whole thing where, for whatever reason, his powers weren't really working, so he wasn't able to fully flame on and all this stuff. It's not really relevant, but in any case, he's back at the doctor's office. He's getting his checkup, and they're like, "You're all in the clear. You're good to go." And as he flames back on, Spidey shows up, and he's like, "Hey, I wanted to thank you for those things that you said. They really meant a lot to me." And Torch is sitting here thinking like, I'm glad, but what? Like, when did I like inspire you? What are you talking about? So we end with a final shot of the Human Torch flying over the crowd and just thinking to himself, flying over the crowd of the high score, was that's here for day 2 of his assembly thing, and he's thinking to himself, someone in that crowd is probably Spider-Man. Of course, doesn't know who, but eventually he will, and that'll all come much later in the career, if you will, of both Human Torch and Spider-Man. So, yeah. So that is the end of The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 3. I really like this issue overall. Like I said, I did have that one issue about Doc Ock's motives not really being clear, but other than that, I mean, the message is great. The artwork and the writing, aside from Doc Ock's motive, was all great. So, I really do like this overall. And that message of, it doesn't matter how many times you fall down, as long as you get back up again, that's what's important. That is just incredibly good. This is also one where we don't have 2 stories in one issue this time. It is just this issue, so that is the entire story. That is the entire, that's it for this part. So, but again, yes, no, I did very much enjoy I did very much enjoy that issue overall. Getting back to the whole thing of, if Doc Ock is Spidey's like arch nemesis or anything, I don't think so. I'm sorry. I just think Gabi has a more personal attachment to him. I think Venom's a good runner up. I think Doc Ock was his first like real threat. We definitely saw that here, but I really think that yeah, I really have to give it to Green Goblin. And as we continue going through the issues and other material of Spider-Man here, I think we'll see that more and more, and I'll get to flesh out that ideas more. Although I'm not too familiar with Doc Ock in the comics, so I don't really know. I know later he does like the Superior Spider-Man thing, but I don't really know any big things that Doc Ock has done specifically that make him a contender for being like Spidey's arch nemesis or anything. I'd say he's number 3, but hey, I mean, he does become the leader of the Sinister Six later, and we'll get to that later as well. But until then, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below. Follow me on social media for more. Subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date. Leave a like if you like, and if not, I hope you find something to do like. Later, guys. Peace and love.